Greetings, everyone. My name is Janae Ingram, and I am a longtime advocate and activist, having been associated with organizations and led organizations like National Action Network, the Women's March, and now I'm in corporate America and using my activism in the boardroom and in other corporate executive suites to continue to create broader equity for communities, and particularly those marginalized communities that exist not just here in the US, but around the world. And so I'm excited to be with you all today to have, again, this really important conversation that's really focused on the politics of women's reproductive health. And as everyone should know, we are in the midst of a very important, very integral, I'll say, election cycle, one that will in many ways decide the direction not only of this country, but of the people that live within it and the lives that they lead. And I think a core issue amongst the issues that we will hear about in this election is the issue of women's reproductive health and reproductive rights. And we know that 2 years ago, June of 2022, the longstanding law that gave women the right to have autonomy over their own bodies was undone through the Dobbs decision. And since then, we have continued to see sort of an ongoing rolling back of rights in states across the country. And it is, you know, it goes without saying that this issue is not just about the ability for a woman to say how and when and what will happen to her body and give her bodily autonomy, but it's also an economic issue, one that puts women in a position where they have to make decisions about what will happen and how their families will be supported. It's a family planning issue. There are so many issues that are tied into this issue of reproductive rights and reproductive health. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And so I am excited to kick off and bring us together. I'm going to introduce today's panelists. We'll get into a video, but then we will also get into a much needed discussion with time for questions and answers at the end of the discussion, because we want to hear from the folks who are joining, who are not on the panel, hear what your thoughts are about this conversation. But we are really excited today to be joined by Dr. Erkeda DeRouen, Jasmine Winters, and we have Bianca Gause. And they are going to talk to you a little bit more about the issues from their perspectives, and their perspectives are varied. Jasmine Winters is the coordinator of reproductive health for Thrive New Jersey Coalition, which is a patient advocate. I'm sorry, she is also a patient advocate for the Women's Centers, a community leader of Coalition of Change for New Jersey, and a committee member, of NAACP, the South Jersey Gloucester County chapter. Erkeda DeRouen is a triple board certified healthcare technology subject matter expert who specializes in crafting conversations from health tech, health equity, and diversity in medicine. And last but not least, Bianca Gause is a dedicated mother and wife, and also a triple threat performer. And as the new marketing director for the White Dress Project, she advocates for women's health while drawing from her personal battle with fibroids. And so, ladies, welcome to this very important conversation. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much for everyone coming in today to share your invaluable insights and expertise on this matter. And if you are ready, I have the video to play.
That's wonderful. And then we can jump into questions. I love
the conversation. Yep.
This is the sixth debate we have had in this presidential cycle, and not nearly one word with all of these discussions about healthcare on women's access to reproductive healthcare, which is under full-on attack in America today. And it's outrageous. There are states that have passed laws that will virtually prevent women from having access to reproductive health care. And it is not an exaggeration to say women will die Poor women, women of color will die because these Republican legislatures in these various states who are out of touch with America are telling women what to do with our bodies. Women are the majority of the population in this country. People need to keep their hands off of women's bodies and let women make the decisions about their own lives.
Thank you, Senator.
And let's talk about
Senator.
that. That is a significant health care issue in America today. Across our nation, we are witnessing a full-on assault against hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights. The freedom to vote and the freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government telling her what to do. And when I am President of the United States and when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedoms for every woman in America, I will sign it into law.
There you have it. That is the issue that we are confronted with.
And unfortunately, it's been years. That's crazy. We're still talking about this.
Absolutely. So you saw 4 years ago, there
Mhm.
not being a conversation. And those images from the Women's March, I mean, I think what I will say just briefly before jumping into questions is that the narrative around women in the 2020 election cycle, or sorry, in the 2016 election cycle, which was the cycle before, was highly problematic. And then 4 years later, you had that speech from Senator Harris at the time, Senator Harris, talking about the fact that no one was talking about on the debate stage women's reproductive rights. And then now another 4 years have gone by, and we are seeing again a progressive or regressive rollback of women's rights. And so I want to really jump into the conversation because there's a lot to talk about, and we could probably have a 4-hour call and we still would probably barely scratch the surface. So I know that there's a lot for us to talk about, but I want to turn it to our expert panel, and I want you to sort of share. And actually, I'll start with Dr. DeRouen. Can you talk a little bit about the current state of women's reproductive rights in the U.S.? Why is this conversation important? And I want you to sort of start with, kick us off there.
Sure. As we've seen in the video, like the state of women's health is kind of at this point in which we can't ignore it anymore. It's been rumbling over the years, and we've seen what has happened when people don't talk about these things and aren't educated about how it can affect everyone because you think it doesn't affect me. And we've seen how the Supreme Court has made decisions that do affect all women, especially with Roe versus Wade, where we've seen this wave of state level abortion bans and restrictions, and now they have abortion deserts. And we don't think about necessarily the implications of that on every woman, because a lot of women may be thinking, oh, I'm not going to get an abortion, or that's not my problem, or whatever. But it's a wave effect, even just from the medical system, where students who are thinking about going into OBGYN may choose to either not go into it because of all of the policy things going on in the realm that may put them and themselves at risk, or they may decide to go into OBGYN but not go into those states where we need GYNs for everything. So if you have breast cancer, cervical cancer, if you need a pap smear, if you need other things, like there's more to women's health than abortion and the things that are on the front line. So we know that there are wait times that can be 4 to 6 months now to get an appointment. Imagine what that will do as time goes on. We know that maternal health outcomes, especially for Black women in the US, are quite alarming. We are dying about 3 to 4 times more likely than other like white women in childbirth, and Black women have a higher rate, like 4 to 6 times of preeclampsia and eclampsia after delivery. If we don't have those people in there watching out and listening to us, because we all know about all of the things with gaslighting and bias that are out there, what are we going to do? And then one thing I also want to highlight about the state of healthcare for women, we talk a lot about women's health. And when we talk about it, we do talk about reproductive health because that is important. But we also must remember that women's health, women are more than their vaginas. So a lot of women during their childbearing years love to talk about going to the GYN for their between their 20s and 40s where they're reproducing and only see them. But we can't forget about primary care. We can't forget about PCPs. At heart, I'm a family medicine doctor by training, so we have to remember our whole selves and to go at least get a wellness check once a year, get your labs, making sure you're not missing anything. A cautionary tale, I don't particularly wish I had to share, but I made a promise to her that I would share her story every time I got the opportunity as my little cousin last year. And 30 years old, been seeing her GYN for 2 years, being worked up for endometriosis, developed a cough, thought it was COVID, thought it was other chronic diseases that run in the family. Her mother has sarcoidosis. After about a month or two of workup, was found to have stage 4 lung cancer. She didn't have a primary care doctor. And because she had Medicaid and we live in the DMV area, in the DC metro area, for those who don't know, she was diagnosed in DC but had Maryland insurance. So the hospital that she saw in DC said, we can't help you, go to Maryland. And they just gave her a discharge summary after they diagnosed her with stage 4 lung cancer. So thankfully I was able to get her into Johns Hopkins, which was awesome. But everyone doesn't have a doctor in the family, and everyone shouldn't have to get care they deserve. And unfortunately, about 3 or 4 months after being diagnosed, she passed away. So we have to be mindful of taking care of ourselves. And when something isn't right, you have to keep pushing to get answers.
I'm so sorry for your loss. And that story, it's actually the second time I've heard a similar story. I recently heard of a person in Houston who a similar thing happened to. Started developing a cough, thought it was COVID, and then ultimately found out that it was also lung cancer. She had previously had other types of cancer that she thought she got. But you raised a lot of great points, and specifically, to your point, for many people, going to the GYN is the doctor that they see. It's the one doctor that people associate with. That's the thing, the doctor that they go see pretty regularly. And when we're talking about access to care, when we're talking about, pushing out or ending or closing Planned Parenthoods and other OBGYN services in states across the country, it is cutting off people's access to care. And I think so often the conversation is sort of centered on abortion, and that's it. It's like abortion, and that's the end of the conversation. The thing that I will say is you raised a point of most people are like, oh, I'm not going to get an abortion, or I don't think abortion's for me. And there are a lot of people, and these stories have obviously been coming out since the Dobbs decision in 2022, of people who never thought that they would get or need an abortion. But if they have a pregnancy complication, that is something that requires, maybe for certain people, it might require that an abortion is necessary to save the life of the mother, to end the pregnancy for a child that would not survive outside of the womb. And so I want to turn it to Jasmine, because I think, we talk about just abortion, and a lot of the conversation and the broader debate ends up being about abortion, but we know that that's not all that exists when it comes to women's reproductive health. And Dr. DeRouen just talked a lot about that. But from your perspective at the women's centers, what reproductive health services are most in demand and why?
And before I go into my response, Dr. DeRouen, I also want to extend my condolences to your family and for your loss as well. We all have to do better. We have to do better, and that is why interactions like this are so important. And to your question, this is also a very important question, because as my role with the women's centers, which is where we specialize in abortion and pregnancy options, our services are always in a high demand. And those demands have risen particularly after the Dobbs decision in June of 2022. We have seen 20 to 22 states move to ban and limit access to safe, affordable abortion care. Nationally, there are half as many providers as there were before. And even those statistics show that 1 in 4 women will have an abortion in their lifetime, which is not frequently talked about because of the political climate. The Women's Centers continues to service and advocate for patients to ensure they receive the medical needs necessary to their own decision-making process over their own bodily autonomy. And as providers, we strive to maintain to help navigate all of the challenges that are in high demand, such as transportation for patients, STI testing, Pap smears, and more importantly, funding to help minimize the out-of-pocket cost of all of these reproductive health services and needs that intersect with abortion care. Because just like Dr. DeRouen mentioned, it's not just abortion, period. It's maternal justice, it's sex education, it's menstrual equity. Everything intersects. Housing affordability. It's all of these topics are not talked about enough, especially in the Black and Brown community and marginalized areas. And if the conversation isn't there, the resources can't be provided. And so, ending with this, thank you all for putting this together, because this is a very important conversation that we need to have more often, more and more.
You touched on something, and I wanna double click on it just so you can sort of talk about it a little bit more and maybe go a little bit more in detail. In terms of socioeconomic factors that influence and impact and access to reproductive health care. There's lots of again, talk of what women should be doing, but there's not a holistic look at, one, the access that's available, or two, the impact of removing said access and how that then creates further downstream impacts for a woman and her socioeconomic status or her ability to sort of maneuver through life in a specific way. So I would love if you could just sort of talk a little bit more about that.
As far as socioeconomic factors, income, safety, financial support. At the Women's Centers, we care for women, men, and gender nonconforming people who can become pregnant, including men who just want STI testing. Socioeconomic factors that influence access to reproductive health care include, but are not limited to, as mentioned, income, safety, financial support, and a majority of our patients have little to no income. And with inflation at an all-time high, it can be near impossible to have $500 to $1,000 in a savings account for an unexpected medical procedure. The safety of our patients becomes a factor as at the Women's Centers, we often service folks who may become victim of domestic violence, non-consensual sex of all ages. Having little to no emotional, mental, or financial support adds to these factors. And although New Jersey is a Medicaid state, meaning your abortion care services will be provided for through your state insurance, we still have socioeconomic factors such as the Hyde Amendment, which bans the use of federal funds for abortion and other reproductive needs, that only allows exceptions to pay for terminating pregnancies that could endanger the life of the pregnant person, or that result from rape or incest in most states. That's what your insurance would cover. However, once again, since Dobbs, we are seeing more and more bans that influence access to reproductive health care, regardless of the circumstances. And it's just a matter of staying vocal with your legislators and people who hold that political power, which is why this election year is so, so important for us to raise our voices.
Thank you for that. I think this is a great time to sort of pivot the conversation, or I shouldn't even say pivot, but sort of expand more on the politics, which you just touched on, Jasmine. And I want to bring in Bianca and ask if you can share your insights about how the recent political changes, or not so recent, or obviously we started this off talking about sort of the longer term trajectory that got us to where we are, and we could probably even go back before the 2016, not probably, we could definitely go back before the 2016 election cycle. But how have the political changes, how have you seen that affect women's access to reproductive health care? And talk to us a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So recent political changes have clearly significantly impacted women's reproductive health rights, which have led to very dangerous consequences, like women losing their lives. Just a few days ago, and I just saw this article, there was a couple women in Texas who had life-threatening pregnancies that were denied care. So since the Roe versus Wade was overturned, there have been hundreds of pregnant women who have been denied emergency care, leaving many women who are at their most vulnerable time in life without any immediate options. I don't want to be too graphic, but there are some women who are miscarrying in public restrooms. There's women going into septic shock. There's women losing fallopian tubes and ovaries through life-saving surgeries that could have been avoided if they were given the proper care that they needed. So it's really not feasible to tell women, go get your care in another state, because during a medical emergency, you might not make it to that next state, or you don't have the money to afford to get there. Or when you do get there, does your insurance work in another state? So, personally, when I was pregnant with my second child, I had a very high-risk pregnancy due to my past with fibroids, which ultimately brought me to having placenta previa and Erkeda. And those are conditions that require you to be in a very close proximity to your hospital, because there's a risk of you bleeding out. And when you start bleeding, you have, I think it's like 5 or 10 minutes to get to the hospital or something like that. And I actually had 3 bleeding emergencies. And the way that I felt when that was happening, I cannot imagine being forced to have to travel out of state for care. So that really put into perspective for me what these women are going through who have lost their rights in these states, and the states cannot care for them in the way that they need to, and the fear that these women must have. And if we're really going to get into it, politics typically don't interfere with medical practices unless it intersects with sex and reproduction. There are no, and there have never been any laws that give government the power to make decisions about the male body. So the government shouldn't be regulating our bodies either, especially when the majority of the people making these laws have never experienced what it is to be a woman in the first place. I have a nearly 2-year-old daughter, and I'm shaken to my core that it is a possibility she will be growing up with less rights than what I had. So I'm taking this as a personal mission to ensure that she has more rights than as a woman of color growing in the nation that is supposed to be the land for all, for her to have equality and rights that everyone should have. And we need to expand the framework, like you guys have been talking about, in which we think about reproductive justice, because a lot of people do just think, oh, it's, about abortion and that has nothing to do with me, and they write it off. But reproductive justice, like you said, is not just about abortion. It's about the right to have a child and raise them in a healthy, safe environment, the right to survive your pregnancy and childbirth. The maternal mortality rate for Black women and Black infants as well is 3 times higher than the national average. It's all just insane and unacceptable. And we must advocate for comprehensive reproductive rights and justice for all women. And the only way to do this is by using our voices and our votes to support people that believe that women's rights, reproductive rights, and equality are non-negotiable. That shouldn't even be a discussion. Like, that's, to me, common sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's common sense as well. And yet somehow here we are.
Yes, having to talk about this.
Having to talk about this, having to contend with this. And, I don't know who all is on the call. Hopefully, it's people who, if you are not in a marginalized community, you are an ally, you are a co-conspirator. But what I will say is, I think this sort of movement against women, it's existed since Roe happened.
Mhm.
Since the moment Roe v. Wade, that decision came out, there has been a coordinated sort of effort to overturn it.
Right.
And it was successful. And so I just want everyone to remember, even when we think that we've won on an issue, that issue is not over. There are other forces who want to see things go back to the way that they once were, and they are looking to take away our rights. That is something I want everyone to just make sure you are thinking about as you are accessing the polls. Think about in this cycle, think about in not just this cycle, but the future cycles, not just the presidential elections, but the local and the state level elections as well, because politics really does impact our lives. And there are times when we lose a right, and it will take a very long time for that right to be gained, or regained, or for us to see what we once had won come back to us. And so the goal is to not lose what we've gained, to not lose that progress. Bianca, I want to stay with you for just a second and talk a little bit more about what the White Dress Project does and the role that you all play in sort of advocating for policy change. This is the time that we need people advocating in the halls of DC, but not just in the halls of DC, in the halls of every state and local and city level hall that there is, to make sure that these rights are won. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the White Dress Project is deeply committed to advocating for policy changes that improve women's reproductive health. We understand the importance of community and sharing our stories with each other, but also that advocacy on the legislative level is very important as well. So our advocacy efforts focus on raising awareness about fibroids and their impact on women's health. And recently, we were able to support Congresswoman Brown's You Fight Act, which authorizes the Secretary of Health and Human Services to award grants to increase early detection of and intervention for uterine fibroids, education, awareness programs, and research. So this is really a big deal that there is legislation, in the process to really support fibroids, because that, as many women as it affects, which is, I think it's something like 80% of Black women before the age of 50 will have fibroids. And there's maybe 1% of research going towards that. Again, insane and wild. But this act will also address Asherman syndrome, which is uterine scar tissue buildup following surgeries that you may get to remove the fibroids, and disparities in pain control and management as it relates to uterine fibroids. So by partnering with organizations and policymakers, we are ensuring that women's voices are heard and that their health needs to be prioritized. We empower women to share their stories and advocate for themselves. And we have created a very robust community. And when you have a community of people that are sharing their stories and they are brave enough to say something needs to change, that's what drives change. That's what makes policymakers and people who can create that law to listen. There has to be enough people talking about it, right? So like I said before, reproductive rights is more than abortion. It also includes access to birth control, IVF, sex education, menstrual products. And birth control, for example, is often prescribed to women with fibroids because it helps to regulate severe symptoms. I was prescribed birth control when I think I was like 16, and it wasn't, anything related to sex at all. It was merely to manage my bleeding and fibroid symptoms. So women with PCOS or fibroids, they might have to get IVF to grow their families. And all of these things, like you said, are under attack right now. And I don't even think people are thinking of the whole picture. They're looking at it like, well, pro-life, but it's like pro-life is also about women's life too, people who are here already. So yes, comprehensive sex education is crucial, as knowledge is a powerful tool for understanding and caring for our bodies. And Jasmine, I think you touched on the period poverty that is going on as well. And this forces girls to miss school sometimes. Women are missing work because they can't afford menstrual products. There are girls who are wearing, I just saw a movie, Me Period, and it really just opened my eyes to how serious this is, that there are girls who are wearing tampons longer than what is safe, risking toxic shock syndrome just because they can't afford to buy another box of tampons. So this is unacceptable that menstrual products are taxed as a luxury item and men's Viagra is deemed as a necessity because that's backwards to me. So we need legislation to protect women's reproductive rights from all the different sides. And the only way to achieve this is by electing officials, like you said, Janae, at every level who will advocate for our best interests. And that even means every level, like school board for your kids, because what they decide affects the girls in school. So it really is an honor to be a part of an organization that is fighting for this on every level and is providing this education to people who might want to know more but don't know where do you look to find this information? Where do you look to figure out stuff that the government's not even talking about? So the White Dress Project is committed to continuing to provide the resources, the education, and the funds for research for this.
Wow, you touched on a lot of different topics. And I mean, that's what this conversation is really about. And I think what is really, again, we could sit here for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, but what we really want is for people who are here today and who are listening to, one, research these organizations more, research these panelists more, get to know their work, find out ways that you can support them, find out ways that you can volunteer. Bianca just dropped again the link for donations. There are many ways that you can get involved. I think the other part is taking these conversations and having them with people who can't be here right now, continuing to educate people about why this issue is so critical, why this issue is so important, why this issue, quite frankly, might be the decision-making factor in this upcoming presidential election. It impacts every woman who is here, and I want to acknowledge that not all women, that it impacts people who have, it impacts people in different ways, but it impacts people. Don't want to exclude gender nonconforming people who might not say that they are a woman, who might not choose to be on the binary. Want to acknowledge that those people also have a responsibility and a role, and this impacts them in different ways. And so you touched on a lot of different points that I think are important. Just acknowledging that there are 20 states that still charge what we call the tampon tax, which is taxing feminine products in a way that it does not have parity with Viagra, or does not should not be taxed as a luxury item. And so that's a really important issue. I want to also take this time to sort of pivot and expand the conversation with both Dr. DeRouen and Jasmine, to talk also about how you all are engaging with the policy aspects of this issue, both as a healthcare provider and the role that healthcare providers can play in shaping the policy conversation, as well as helping to expand education with the general population who may not necessarily be as well informed. And then Jasmine, also same question to you. How are you at the Women's Centers seeing the policy advocacy space? What are you all doing? Are there ways that people can get engaged with the work that you're doing?
I guess I'll start.
Yeah.
I think that's a good question. And I think that it's something that is coming out, because I think historically it's kind of frowned upon for, I'll say, clinicians, because providers to me kind of has a negative connotation, because it's kind of providing what the system is pushing us to do without utilizing our knowledge and our voice. So a lot of clinicians actually live in fear to speak about these important topics like politics and healthcare, out of fear for reprimand from their employers and other things. Whereas clinicians have been trained to give their quality, evidence-based clinical care to those who need and trust us. So with that, we have to just think and take a step back, because they're trying to say, keep politics out of healthcare. But if they wanted us to do that, they would keep the politics out of healthcare. So healthcare is political. And we have to work to think about the best interests of our patients, because we all know, like, physicians took an oath to do no harm. So we're the ones who are tasked with like giving people bad news about like their lack of insurance coverage. And I'm sure all of you guys have had your doctor come to you or your insurance company and say, oh, we need a prior authorization and we need your doctor to call us and give that. Like, call me and tell me, like, I wrote a note that said they need it. Why do I have to tell you I agree that they still need it? So things like that that are pushed by pharma and other things, like we're the ones who are kind of left to cry with you and console your family when you get bad news or you're diagnosed with something later that could have been treated in a more effective manner if it was found to be earlier. So I think that clinicians have a unique point where they are with patients in their most intimate moments and things, and they build that trust. So they can work by pushing their associations to advocate for patients in their best interest, because sometimes we have these organizations like the American Medical Association and the National Medical Association, which are trying to do great work, but sometimes you need your voices behind that to push for the issues that are affecting the patients. You can speak to politicians and government agencies about the key areas of concerns and how they're actually impacting patients and using these real stories, because it's all kind of speculation, but we have these stories of people we are seeing every day. They can sit on advisory boards. They can educate their patients on things, platforms like this. We can talk about this on social media because we're meeting patients where they are. I know historically people would print out the little after visit summaries that go right in the trash can. We know this. So meeting them where they are and not kind of shying away from things like TikTok and Instagram to talk to patients in digestible manners and not use all that medicalese that nobody knows what you're talking about. Like, use real human language and educate patients on not only healthcare issues, but how to navigate their system because it's confusing out there. And then how specific policies can impact them in a way they may not necessarily realize, like we were mentioning earlier, like the tampon tax. Like, outside of that, like, how can we get safe tampons? We've seen recently, like, there's arsenic and cancer causing agents. We need more research. Like, they have not allowed women to be involved in research until 1993. So all of the research that has been done on all the medicines we are taking, on all of the things that are impacting us, is mostly on men, and it's mostly on white men. So we know, like, historically, people of color may have some distrust in the system. We've heard about the Tuskegee story. We've heard about Henrietta Lacks. We've heard about all of these different things. And even in women's health specifically, a lot of that research in the 1800s, originally the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, actually experimented and learned a lot of his things on working on Black women, his enslaved women, without any anesthesia, because he didn't believe that we experienced pain. So we have the power to educate, advocate, and use our voices to push things forward. And I think that clinicians need to step out of the shadows and take that responsibility.
Thank you for that. Yeah. It's unbelievable that from there to here, we're still in some ways having some of the same conversations. So Jasmine, I'll turn it to you now. Can you talk a little bit about how political advocacy impacts the work that you do at the Women's Centers?
Absolutely. So along with patient advocacy with the Women's Centers, I'm also the coordinator for a statewide coalition, Thrive New Jersey Coalition, where we work hand in hand with other organizations around the state. And so for those who may not be familiar with Thrive New Jersey Coalition, we are a statewide coalition of more than 80 organizations. We work collectively to promote sexual and reproductive health rights and justice through advocacy and policy change. We have focus areas around abortion and contraception access, maternal justice, menstrual equity, sex education, and interfaith partner efforts. And so to answer this very layered question, what I do know is elections have outcomes. And policies that are put into place or not in place depends on who holds the power. And I'll say that again. Policies that are put into place or not in place depends on who holds the power. It is not just legislative, but it is also judicial, state, Supreme Courts. They all have an impact on the political landscape of how we operate. And we know that voter suppression is reproductive oppression. Again, voter suppression is reproductive oppression, and is linked because abortion is a popular issue and over 60% of people in the state vote abortion. There are campaigns that purposefully oppress people from voting. And so we do the work to try to interrupt that false narrative with outreach to our communities with things like civic engagement instructions to our patients. We provide the information and tools to help people determine what they want to do with their pregnancy and ensure that people can have their voices heard. We do a lot of political education, and we welcome legislators into our clinics to allow for a more informed legislative body. And we've provided multiple messaging trainings for the governor's office for language use and so much more. And we continue the onward and ongoing political advocacy influences in those ways, staying in your legislator spaces.
That's so important. Oh, go ahead, Dr. DeRouen.
Add something. I love what you were saying about the power. And I think that a lot of times we have to reframe our thinking. A lot of people may hear the buzzwords that of social determinants of health. And with that is kind of the 5 realms of, if you have great education, safe neighborhoods, community senses of building that, access to quality, like economic stability and access to healthcare, you're going to be healthier. And it's a lot of papers on it, a lot of pushes and all of these kinds of things. And it's really the common sense determinants of health, because of course, if you have those things, you are going to be further ahead and your health is going to be better. But what we need to really think about is the political determinants of health, because when you're using your voice, you're choosing those people who have that power, who make those decisions, who make those policies that impact where you actually live. So we love to talk about, yes, the big election this year, we need to go out and vote, but vote all the way down the ballot every time, even when it's not a presidential election, because we are seeing that it's affecting you personally via your zip code. Who are your Congress people? Who are your county representatives? Who are these people who are impacting your everyday life? Because when we look at certain things, as we pour into it, from the politicians pulling into like what kind of financial incentives they give for certain things, you can see the disparities. An example is Baltimore, where in West Baltimore, the life expectancy for a Black man is at 58, I think. And for a white man, 5 miles over in Roland Park, which is more affluent, it's in the 80s. There should not be a 30-year life expectancy within five miles. It's all about voting and that power, using your voice, coming together collectively. No politician is perfect. So even if you disagree with certain things, push on it. Just don't sit out and not vote just because you don't believe in one thing. Like, use your voice and come together and discuss it. Like, this should be something where you're getting each other to come together for a big movie that's coming out or a party or something like that. Get together and go vote and have a cookout after. Take off on Tuesday.
I love that. Yeah, make it a celebratory thing. Offer rides to people who don't have them. Like you said, do a cookout or do something afterwards. Take off if you can. Not everyone can, but if you can, make a day of it.
I love those ideas. That's so fun.
Yeah. And just remember, I think, as we talk about power, we have the power, the collective people, we have the power to put people in office and to also put people out of office. And so collectively, we have a responsibility. I think it was Jasmine, you said, stay in your elected officials' faces. That's absolutely right. If you put them there, and even if you didn't put them there, even if you didn't vote for an elected official, that elected official, if they are representing your district, or if they're representing your community, or if they are representing you, they have a responsibility to listen to you. They have a responsibility to hear what you are saying. They have a responsibility to lift up the issues that you care about, but they only know that you care about them if you stay in their faces. So I love that saying, and I hope that people take that and heed it. I want to turn before in the last few minutes that we have and talk a little bit more about this advocacy role. And Dr. DeRouen, I'm going to come back to you, and I want you to talk a little bit more about giving advice to women, and other people who want to advocate for their reproductive rights. Can you talk to them and talk to the people here about what they should be doing and ways that they can be advocating for their health outcomes, as well as the role that the doctor should play in helping them create those advocacy points?
I think it's something that we've been talking about throughout, whereas you have a voice, you have to share it, you have to use it. Stories are so important and they make concepts real. So you just have to figure out where to share your story. An easy place if you don't have connections is social media, sharing it there, sharing it with your politicians, going to these organizations, going to these spaces of influence where you can align with mission or organizations. A lot of these healthcare organizations actually have to have patients on their boards and things like that. And a lot of the startup areas, they actually need that. They want that feedback. So give it to them. Use your voice, educate yourself so you know what you are talking about. So if you don't know what's going on, you can't join the coalition to create the change that we need. So figuring out where to get reputable information, that's a place where you can talk with your doctor about and ask questions. There's a lot of misinformation floating around there. So you want to be sure that you're using these resources that are reliable, speaking up when something doesn't feel right for yourself, like asking questions and continuously seeking knowledge. Like if something doesn't feel right, continue to do that research until you know why. Ask those questions. Don't just take no for an answer. We may have seen, during the George Floyd times where it came out like we're changing a lot of things in terms of the measurements with kidney care, because historically with all the racism and things like that, there were different measurements of BMI, and Black people have higher masses, they were saying, in terms of body. So we were getting delayed care with kidney care because our numbers were higher in order to qualify for kidney transplants and dialysis. So a lot of our family members may have progressed to dialysis when they didn't need to or passed away. So figuring out these ways, and when you find them out, exposing them and pushing for change. So that's why we're not using those kind of metrics anymore, because people were talking about it and they were speaking out. And like realizing that like those political determinants of health are so important and they actually make the world spin. So when we are in those politician spaces, we have to continue to bring other people there, because according to the CDC, Black people die at earlier ages from all causes, not just women's health ones, like every single cause there is, and it's not a genetic factor. So we shouldn't accept that. So if we keep these conversations going and we put people in these places, in these positions of powers, because there is a way to get there, and encourage other people to learn about what's going on and not just worry about themselves, I think that that's a great start for advocacy and for influencing other people like allies to also join along with us.
So important, so important. And Jasmine, I'm going to turn to you with the last question from me, unless there are no audience questions, and we'll come back. But I want you to share some effective advocacy strategies for people, organizations that can really help shape and influence health policies from your perspective.
So as a coordinator of Thrive New Jersey Coalition, I can't speak enough on how impactful a strong coalition can be, and aligning with key stakeholders with the same policies or same issues who are aligned with intersectional needs and understanding. We're stronger in numbers. We are more powerful together as we lift our collective voices and resources to tackle and advocate for issues like maternal justice, menstrual equity, abortion and contraception access, and doing this work alongside some of our coalition partners. We work with such as healthcare providers, immigrants, advocacy groups, faith-based leaders, human rights organizations, and so many more interconnected groups that make up the 80+ organizations of Thrive New Jersey. As a coalition, there are so many actions you can do to raise awareness. And even not as a coalition, as an individual, stay in the know of your community and organizations such as the White Dress Project, such as Thrive Coalition, or knowing your local providers like Dr. DeRouen. But actions such as raising awareness and mobilizing individuals to message trainings and how to communicate on them effectively, knowing how to speak to your lawmakers, driving phone calls, letters to lawmakers to let elected officials know what they want to happen. The women's centers, we do storytelling for individuals to feel supported and heard, doing rallies, showing up at the State House to make noise, make sure we are continuing to apply the necessary pressure to our lawmakers to hold them accountable, are some effective advocacy strategies that we maintain every day in the line of work that I'm faced in.
And those are really helpful strategies. And I think, just lifting up again, there's a wealth of resources that are available. You named a bunch of organizations that people should follow up with, look and see if there are volunteer opportunities or if there's information. If you're not looking to volunteer, but you're just looking for more information, and find ways to continue the conversation. Again, this is despite us being in an election season, which makes this a really high priority and high visibility time for this type of conversation. We cannot forget that this conversation is not just a conversation. It's issues that are impacting real people all across the state, all across the country. These are issues that we need people like you all who have joined us here today to keep going beyond this moment, and just continuing to educate yourselves and others about how the issues are impacting them. So I want to turn it back to Bianca, who I think is going to lead the Q&A and maybe close us out.
All right, I don't see any questions here in the chat, so maybe we're just answering everybody's questions. I mean, we are giving a lot of really thorough information. I don't see any questions. So if you guys do have questions, you can always, DM us or follow us on social media and ask us there. I want to thank everybody for joining us today for this incredibly important conversation. I hope that you found the discussion insightful and empowering. I know I learned some things today that I did not know. I want to extend a very heartfelt thank you to our moderator, Janae Ingram, for always being a leader in protecting the rights of women. Also, our esteemed panelists, Jasmine Winters from the Women's Center and Dr. Erkeda DeRouen. Your insights and expertise have just been invaluable today. This webinar is being recorded and will be live on our YouTube channel. So if you were watching this and you feel like there's someone who you would want to send this to or needs to hear this information, once it is live, please feel free to share this video with them, share it on Facebook, share it on your socials, because that's really what's important, is that we continue to put this information out there and we teach people how to do the work in using your voice. As we conclude, I want to remind everyone that the fight for women's reproductive health rights is ongoing, just like Janae said, and we need your support. The White Dress Project is dedicated to advocating for policy changes that protect and promote women's health, but we cannot do it alone. So your donations and support are crucial in helping us to continue this vital work. I have put the link in the chat. I hope that you felt moved enough by today's discussion to utilize the link. If you're looking at this on YouTube, the link is in the description down below. And your contributions will help us to fund research, provide educational resources, and continue to advocate for policies that protect women's health. We also want you to get involved. It's not just about dollar signs, it's also about action. So you want to join our community and stay updated on our initiatives by following us on social media at We Can Wear White. Also sign up for our newsletter, where once a month we are sending you all of the latest information in women's reproductive health. If there's something that needs to, have your attention or an action that we can take, it will be in that newsletter for sure. You can sign up there at thewhitedressproject.org. And again, share what you've learned today with your friends and family. Stay engaged. Voting is one of the most powerful ways to advocate for yourself and your community. Please stay informed about the candidates, not just presidential, but on all of the different levels, all the way down the ballot. And the policies that they are preaching and talking about. Pay attention to what they are saying. Look at the actions of what these candidates are choosing to do when they have power. What are they actually doing what they promised? Because you can't always listen to what they're saying. Sometimes you got to look at what people are doing, especially when it impacts women's health. And you want to make sure your voice is heard in every election. The White Dress Project is more than an organization. It is a movement, and every one of you is a vital part of it. So thank you once again for being with us today. Together, we can make a difference. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and let's continue to fight for our rights and the rights of future generations. Thank you, everybody. Vote, 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 says Jasmine.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you, panelists. Great job, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Take care,
Yeah.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.